All right, guys, we're on part 6 of Rene Descartes, the Discourse on the Method. A Discourse on the Method, part 6, the final part of this pretty small book. So there's 14 pages, and it's pretty brilliant. So I have to read slow and stop and look up words and let it sink into my brain. So I'll just be reading half. I'm gonna do this in 2 parts again. So this is gonna be the first video of part 6. It is now 3 years since I completed the treatise that contained all the above. I was beginning to revise it so that I could place it in the hands of a printer when I learned that persons to whom I defer and whose authority holds hardly less sway over my actions than my own reason over my thoughts had condemned a physical theory published a little earlier by someone else, to which I would not want to go so far as to say I subscribed, but only that I had seen nothing in it before their act of censure which I could imagine being prejudicial to religion or state, and which consequently would have prevented me from writing about it if my reason had persuaded me to do so. This made me fear that there might be one of my own opinions in which I was equally mistaken, notwithstanding the great care I have always taken never to accept any new opinions for which I did not have certain proof, and not to write about any which might work to the disadvantage of anyone. This was enough to make me change the decision I had taken to publish my theories, for even if the reasons for taking the decision earlier to publish were very strong, my natural inclination, which has always made me dislike the business of writing books, led me to find a host of other reasons for excusing myself from doing so. And these reasons, both for and against, are such that not only do I have some interest in declaring them here, but the public may also have some interest in knowing what they are. I have never laid great store by the products of my mind. And as long as I reaped no other benefits from the method that I use apart from satisfying myself about some problems that belong to the speculative sciences, or trying to direct my life by the precepts that it inculcated in me, I have not felt obliged to write anything about it. For as far as mode of life is concerned, everyone is so sure that they know best that one could find as many reformers as there are people, if it were permitted to any other than those whom God has established as sovereigns over their peoples, or those to whom he has given sufficient grace and zeal to be prophets, to set about changing anything. And although I was very pleased with my speculations, I believe that others had their own which perhaps pleased them even more. But having no sooner acquired some general notions about physics and begun to test them out on various particular problems, I noticed where they may lead and how much they differ from the principles that have been employed up to now. And I believe that I cannot keep them hidden without sinning greatly against the law that obliges us to procure, as far as it is in our power, the general good of all mankind. For these notions have made me see that it is possible to attain knowledge which is very useful in life, and that unlike the speculative philosophy that is taught in the schools, and unlike the speculative and unlike and that unlike the speculative philosophy that is taught in the schools, it can be turned into a practice by which, knowing the power and action of fire, water, air, stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies that are around us as distinctly as we know the different trades of our craftsmen, we could put them to all the uses for which they are suited, and thus make ourselves, as it were, the masters and possessors of nature. This is not only desirable for the discovery of a host of inventions which will lead us effortlessly to enjoy the fruits of the earth and all the commodities that can be found in it, but principally also for the preservation of health, which is without doubt the highest good and foundation of all the other goods of this life. For even the mind depends so much on the temperament and disposition of the organs of the body, that if it is possible to find some way of making men, in most cases, wiser and more skillful than they have been hitherto, I believe that it is in medicine that it must be sought. This is all fascinating. It is true that medicine as presently practiced contains little of such notable benefit, but without wishing to disparage it, I am certain that there is no one, even among those whose profession it is, who will not admit that what is known about it is almost nothing compared to what remains to be known. and that it would be possible to be free of innumerable illnesses of both body and mind, and perhaps even the decline of old age, if we knew enough about their causes and the remedies with which nature has provided us. It's fascinating, isn't it? So intending to devote my whole life to the pursuit of such an indispensable branch of knowledge, and having found a path which I think will inevitably lead me to it, unless prevented from doing so by the brevity of life or the lack of empirical information, I judged that there was no better remedy against these two obstacles than to communicate faithfully to the public what little I had discovered, and to urge good minds to try to go further by contributing, each according to his inclinations and power, to the observations and experiments that need to be undertaken, and by communicating in turn to the public everything that they learn. Thus, as the last would start from where their predecessors had left off, thereby combining the lives and labors of many, we might together make much greater progress than any one man could make on his own. I noted, moreover, in respect of observations and experiments, that the further we progress in knowledge, the more necessary they become. For at the beginning, rather than to seek out rarer and more contrived experiments, it is better to undertake only those which communicate themselves directly to our senses, of which we cannot remain ignorant, provided that we reflect a little on them. The reason for this is that rarer experiments often mislead us at a time when we do not still know the causes of more common ones, and the circumstances on which they depend are nearly always too, or and the circumstances on which they depend are nearly always so specific and minute that it is difficult to take good note of them. But the order to which I have adhered in this regard is the following. First, I have tried to find in general the principles or first causes of everything that exists or can exist in the world. First, I have tried to find in general the principles or first causes of everything that exists or can exist in the world, without considering to this end anything other than God alone, who has created it, and deriving these principles only from certain seeds of truth which are naturally in our souls. After that, I came to examine what are the first and most common effects which one can deduce from these causes, and it seems to me that I have in this way discovered the heavens, heavenly bodies, and an earth, and on the earth water, air, fire, minerals, and several other such things which are the most common and the simplest of all, and hence the easiest to know. Then when I wanted to proceed to more particular things, so many different ones presented themselves to me that I did not believe it possible for the human mind to distinguish the forms or species of bodies that are on the earth from a host of others which might be there, if it had been the will of God to put them there. Consequently, I did not think there was any other way to make them useful to us than by progressing from effects to causes, and by engaging in many individual observations, following which I cast my mind over all the objects that had ever presented themselves to my senses, and I venture to declare that I have not noticed anything which I cannot explain quite easily by the principles I had found. But I must also acknowledge that the power of nature is so ample and vast, that these principles so simple and general, that I am able to observe hardly any particular effect without knowing from the beginning that it can be deduced from the principles in many different ways, and that my greatest difficulty is normally to find in which of these ways the effect depends on them. For I know of no other means of achieving this than by seeking further experiments and observations, whose results will vary according to the way the effect depends on my principles. For the rest, I have now reached the point where I think I can see quite clearly from which angle to approach most of the experiments and observations which can serve this end. But I can see also that there are of such a kind and in so great a number that neither my industry nor my income, even if it were 1,000 times greater than it is, could suffice for all of them. And so I will progress to a greater or lesser degree in knowledge of nature. And so I will progress to a greater or lesser degree in the knowledge of nature, according to the means that I have from now on to undertake more or less of them. I undertook myself to make this known in the treatise I had written, and to show so clearly the use the public may derive from it, that I would oblige all those who desire the good of mankind in general, that is to say, all those who are truly virtuous and do not just pretend to be, or just have that reputation, both to communicate to me the experiments and observations in which they have engaged, and to help me in determining those which still need to be done. Since that time, I have, however, had other reasons to make me change my mind and decide that I had indeed to go on recording everything that I thought of some importance as I discovered the truth about it, and to bring the same care to this task as if I intended to publish my results as much in order to have more opportunity to examine them. As without doubt, we always take greater care over what we think will be seen by many people than over what we do only for ourselves. And things which have seemed true to me when I began to think them out have often seemed false when I have tried to set them down on paper. As to lose no opportunity to benefit the public if I can, so that if my writings are of any value whatsoever, those who will come into possession of them after my death will be able to make the most appropriate use of them. But I decided that I must never agree to them being published during my lifetime to avoid being given occasion to waste the time I intend to use in acquiring knowledge, either on the opposition or the controversy to which they might be subject, or as a result of whatever reputation they might bring me. For although every man is indeed bound to procure the good of others in so far as it is within his power, and we are, in the true meaning of the word, worthless if we are of no use to anyone else, yet it is also true that our efforts have to reach out beyond the present time, and that it is acceptable to omit doing things which might bring some benefit to our contemporaries when this is done in order to bring greater benefit to our grandchildren. I would also like it to be known that the little I have learnt up to now is almost nothing in comparison with what I do not know, and what I have not yet given up the hope of coming to know. For those who gradually discover truth in the sciences are more or less like people who, as they become wealthy, have less difficulty in making great acquisitions than they had earlier in making much smaller ones when poorer. Or they can also be compared to military commanders whose forces usually grow in proportion to their victories, and who need more skill to maintain their position after defeat in battle than they need to take towns and provinces after victory, and who need more skill to maintain their position after defeat in battle than they need to take towns and provinces after victory. Like they will need more skill to maintain their position after losing than the skill needed to take towns and provinces after victory. For to try to overcome all the problems and errors that prevent us attaining knowledge of the truth is indeed to engage in battle. And when we embrace some false opinion on a quite general and important matter, it is equivalent to losing one. Much more skill is needed thereafter to regain the position we were in before than in making great strides forward when we are already in possession of principles which are certain. For my part, if I have so far discovered, I'm going to highlight this. When we embrace some false, when we embrace some false opinion on a quite general and important matter, it is equivalent to losing a battle. Much more skill is needed thereafter to regain the position we were in before than in making great strides forward when we are already in possession of principles which are certain. For my part, if I have so far discovered a number of truths in the sciences, and I hope that the contents of this volume will cause people to think that I have indeed found a few, I can say that they merely result from and depend on my having overcome 5 or 6 principal difficulties. I can say that they merely result from and depend on my having overcome 5 or 6 principal difficulties, which I look on as so many battles in which I had good fortune to be on the winning side. I even dare speculate that I need only to win 2 or 3 others similar to these to fulfill my aims completely, and that I am not so advanced in age that I may not still have, in the ordinary course of nature, enough leisure to achieve this. But the greater the hope I have of being able to spend the time that remains to me usefully, the more I see myself obliged to manage it carefully, and I would without doubt have many opportunities of wasting it if I were to publish the foundations of my physics. For although they are nearly all so incontrovertible that one would only have to be apprised of them to believe them, and although there is not one among them which I do not think that I could prove, yet since it is possible that every one of them will be in agreement with all the different opinions of others, I foresee that I would be often distracted from my work by the hostile reactions to which they would give rise. One might say that this opposition would be useful as much to make my errors known to me as to allow others, if I had got something right, to understand it better. And since many can see more than one man can see by himself, it would allow them to help me with their discoveries as I began to use my own. But although I acknowledge that I am extremely prone to error, and that I almost never trust the first thoughts that come to me. Nevertheless, the experience I have of the objections that can be made to my work prevents me from expecting any benefit from them. I have already often encountered the judgments not only of those whom I have held to be my friends and some I thought indifferent to me, but also of certain others who, through malice and envy, would strive to expose what my friends did not see because of their affection for me. But it has rarely happened that objections have been made which I had not at all foreseen, except those which were not in any way pertinent to my work. Thus, I have almost never come across a critic of my opinions who did not seem either less exacting or less fair than himself. Thus, I have almost never come across a critic of my opinions who did not seem either less exacting or less fair than myself, nor have I ever found any previously unknown truth by means of the disputations that are practiced in the schools. For as long as the participants are trying to win, they are more concerned to make plausibility count than to weigh the two sides of the argument. And those who have long been good advocates do not necessarily go on to make better judges. And those who have long been good advocates do not necessarily go on to make better judges. Plausibility. Come on. Atención. Child, hot. Atención. Plausible. For as long as the participants are trying to win, they are more concerned to make plausibility count than to weigh the two sides of the argument. Plausibility. The quality of seeming reasonable or probable. Plausible means believable or having an appearance of truth. Possible means a thing that may or could happen or be true. Plausible means believable or having an appearance of truth. Like it sounds plausible. It sounds right. It sounds like it could be. Possible means a thing that may or could happen or be true. It's possible. For as long as the participants are trying to win, they are more concerned to make plausibility count. Like they're fighting for their what they want to be true. Because that idea they're trying to win than to see both sides of the argument. They're biased, he's saying. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages left. I think we'll stop there. Pretty much, it's kind of talking about him coming up with what he's discovered so far, and by doing so, his method of whatever he discovered about God, about there being a God. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure.